Hello and welcome to the Warp Shelf. I'm Frank Duran.
I'm Deshaun Vasquez.
And today we're diving into more Star Wars. If you didn't think we were going to talk about a shit ton of Star Wars at the end of the year, you were fucking wrong. Welcome. We're going to be talking about Star Wars Rebels. Why is that? Why are we talking about Star Wars Rebels? Because everybody's going back. Everybody's watching Mandalorian, and they're like, who's Ahsoka Tano? Who's Bo-Katan? And they are going back and watching Clone Wars, but then for this episode's purpose, more importantly, they're going back and watching Rebels.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, Clone Wars is so good. Yeah, you absolutely have to watch Clone Wars. And then they'll be like, yeah, Rebels is good. But like in reality, Rebels is so good that you are not, well, it gets good. It gets good. We'll talk about that a little bit once we get into it. But once it gets good, it is right up there with the Clone Wars and actually feels like a direct sequel to that show and makes it required viewing then and there. But then you start to bring in Darth Vader and Ahsoka Tano, and you're like, oh, this is required viewing for every Star Wars fan. And then it just grows and grows. And it's one of those things that I think you'll hear a lot of like, Rebels is okay, but in reality, Rebels is required Star Wars viewing. This is some of the good shit. This is, after the first season. We'll get into that more. After the first season.
Another reason we're getting into this is because I recently just finished it. You had already watched it a while back, and I had said this on like previous episodes that I was like, I'll get to it. Well, I got to it.
Yes. So guys, pause the episode right now. Go watch Rebels. 4 seasons, a weekend. Come on, guys, you can do it. No, I'm just kidding. I watched this over a long while, and I'm sure you did too. But it's all on Disney Plus. I think first off, if you loved Clone Wars, you'll watch the first season and you'll be like, oh, this isn't Clone Wars. Wait.
I remember even not knowing the context and sort of being indifferent to the announcement and having not seen like anything of Clone Wars aside from like the movie, which is really bad. So it didn't give me a good first impression.
Nope, not a good impression.
And I know fans like loved the show as it went along. So I know when Rebels was announced, fans were pissed because Clone Wars was canceled and never like properly finished.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, now this Rebels thing is coming out. That ruins those plans. and
then they go, no. This is still Clone Wars. And you're like, but how? And then they go, yep, it's Clone Wars. And it's basically, it goes from being like, look at all these new original characters in the first season to being, I feel like I liken this show to, and I know this is kind of a reach, but The Next Generation, Star Trek The Next Generation, where the first season's good. But once they've were in season 2 and beyond, they were like, no, we're a Star Trek show and we're going to do Star Trek things instead of being like, oh, we got to fit into this modern TV vibe, which is what they were going for. They were able to become the greatest Star Trek show, and that doesn't happen here with Rebels. But once it leans into that, it is part of a larger universe other than just being like, look at these original characters fucking around in space. They start to bring in all the Clone Wars characters, then they start to bring in Darth Vader, and then they bring in Maul, and it's, come on. it's
you're really jumping around.
I mean, I'm jumping around a little bit, but it's one of those things where it goes from being a kind of lackluster first season to being a far better product once it leans into what it is.
I had seen the first season when it initially aired. Like I actually watched like the entire thing like week to week.
Yeah.
And the thing that like drew me towards it was like, one, it was going to take place in like original trilogy era, and for the most part, it's really between, as opposed to prequel era. And what drew me was that like Greg Weisman was like part of the creative team. Greg Weisman was the showrunner and creator of Gargoyles, Spectacular Spider-Man, Young Justice.
Great shows.
Yeah.
Great shows.
Really pisses me off that Spectacular isn't on Disney Plus. They have like every fucking Spider-Man cartoon on there except the best one.
Yeah, probably on something else, probably.
Yeah.
At the moment.
But so that initially drew me in. And I didn't dislike the first season, but I felt like it suffered from a lot of meandering around and not really knowing what type of show it wanted to be. And the tone, it had real like tonal whiplash problems, where it wasn't sure if it wanted to like lean more towards Clone Wars and be a little more mature sometimes, but also still like family friendly, sort of all ages, or if it really wanted to be for young kids.
Yeah. And that's really another thing that I say feels like Star Trek The Next Generation, is that like it doesn't know what it wants to be, and the tone is just completely off constantly. I mean, Next Generation was like sex with robots to being like killed by a slime monster, it's just one of those things that you're just like they didn't know what they were doing, like what they wanted to strike. And definitely comes with Rebels, because you have some great like in the beginning you have these like kind of Millennium Falcon episodes. I want to say like the first 3 episodes make you feel like you've joined the crew of another type of a Millennium Falcon, like I'm saying like kind of like a rogues gallery of guys, like, oh yes, an old Jedi, a Mandalorian, a rebel leader, like it's like it feels very Star Wars-y, where it's like, oh, look at all these aliens all coming together, but it doesn't really know what it wants to do. And then you start to get like inklings of it. Like even 4th episode in is Rise of the Old Masters, where Ezra and oh my God, what's the Jedi's name? They go and they find an old temple and they face Inquisitors, and it's one of those first moments where you're like, this show is actually going to lean into the lightsaber fighting. Hell yeah. Like you're like, oh, cool. And it's definitely a high rated episode. And then you have literally the next episode is they send Ezra as an undercover mission into the Imperial Academy. And you have this whole like teenagers can kill the Empire kind of feel going on. And you're just kind of like, okay, guys, we just had a really cool episode. What the fuck is this?
Pretty much. Which, if it was maybe like if this was a Clone Wars episode, or even just like a later Rebels episode, you could have really leaned into like maybe some like Ender's Game type thing. We're just like, wow, we are literally training children for it's like for battle.
Yeah,
but
they don't.
But they really don't.
They really don't. It's one of those things that it's really only those first couple episodes that don't really know what's happening. And then they finally start to slip into it, where they're like, oh, they have Empire Day, which is like the first where they bring the Inquisitors back, and they're like celebrating an Empire holiday. And that's where I feel like you start to feel really what this show can be about, like it's about living under the heel of the Empire, not from a rebellion sake right away, like it's like, oh, what happens when your planet gets taken over, like what do they do, like, and how are they gonna fight back, like what's it like to live like that? And it definitely they start to realize that they're gonna need more lightsabers. I feel like like during these episodes, it's like and I feel like that's obvious, like until Mando, you couldn't not have lightsabers, like, and it not be cool, like there's lots of moments where they try to do that, where they're like, oh, we don't need lightsabers, we got blasters, but you always want a lightsaber. Mm-hmm. And they kind of lean into it and really give you what you want. They bring in more Inquisitors. There's more fights. Ezra learns more, builds his own lightsaber, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Which,
Go ahead.
I was going to say his famous or infamous lightsaber, which is also a blaster, but he never fucking uses the damn thing.
See, I do like this idea of he's got a blaster like Han Solo, but at the he can ignite it as a lightsaber like Luke. Like it's obviously what they're trying to do here is to try to combine.
It's better than the stupid slingshot he has at first.
Yes. Ugh. Just exactly. That felt so like deliberately underpowered. Like one of those things where you're just like, oh. Like, like you're just like, ew, no. So it's really nice when he finally gets his lightsaber and actually is able to use it, Like,
the Inquisitors mark an interesting turn, I guess, because that's when, when the Inquisitors show up, you're like, okay, now I can tune in a little more and focus. But you also have like...
the show feels like that. They finally feel like they're starting to focus up,
like
at that time.
And you have like a great performance out of Jason Isaacs with the Grand Inquisitor in season 1. And it gives you an excuse to have like Dark Jedi, but they also have a different flavor to them where they're not Sith.
Yeah. And I think that's
but it makes sense
that
they'd be force
Sith,
sensitive,
like
like
these are
enforcers.
Dark Jedi.
Yeah. And they all have like their disc hilted lightsaber that's double bladed but also single hilted and also spins, which wouldn't bother me if they didn't fucking helicopter. That's the one step too far every single time.
I always liken this to Thor. I always make fun of this because Thor is a badass character. You see him hitting people with a hammer, it's dope. But then to fly, he goes, and then just whoosh off the side of the screen. And it makes me laugh every time. They try to make it so epic, but like...
You're the only person I know who like really finds it amusing.
It's just so stupid. It's so silly. It's so just like... I'm a strong Superman just fucking flies. Like he knows that you don't need to fucking have a thrill. But of course Thor's like, and you're just like, oh shit, bro, there he goes. Like my people need me. And that's exactly how I feel about this, is that they have the first scenes with this and the blades spin and they kind of do this like pushing Ezra to the edge thing. And you're like, oh, cool idea. Like, how do you defend against this? And then in one of the best episodes with the Inquisitors, they do the first time they fly. And it's one of those things where you're like, these are badass. This is going well. Like, this is that, like, the Rebels is coming together. And then they're just like, oh, way. You're just like, oh God, shit.
It just keeps getting worse. The Grand Inquisitor in season 1 did a little bit to like propel himself forward. But season 2, like, they just keep fucking doing it over and over again. Every time they show up, that by the time you get to like the finale in season 2 at the temple, you get like huge wide shots of them just like go Gadget helicopter.
It looks like two things. It looks like Inspector Gadget.
I just made the joke. go Gadget helicopter.
That's exactly it. It's just like, it looks like Thor and it looks like Inspector Gadget, and it just like, it's one of those things that you're like, these are supposed to be intimidating villains, and then you have them fly away like they're like those remember those 90s fairies that you pulled a string and they fucking shoot in the sky? I think they were called Winks or something like that. And like that's how they look, like they look like those toys where you're like, yeah, and they go flying up into the air. And I know it's a kid's shows, guys, but like there's just physical, there's
again, it's just that
visual
it's that
comedy
one
going on there.
It's that one step too far. Again, everything up till that point I'm cool with. Single-handed double-bladed lightsaber, cool. Spins, cool. Helicopters where I like draw the line.
It's also like there's got to be a physics problem here. Like some I'm not a physics guy, but somebody who knows physics has to have a problem with this, because I know that yes, you can spin any solid object in enough and it will give lift, like because you're causing an underdraft and going off. But we're dealing with a lightsaber, which is like, yes, it's solid, but like, is it physical? Like solid? Like enough that if it spun, would it have lift? Probably not. Like,
yeah. But
of course, lightsabers aren't fucking real, so I'm just like fucking. I'm driving
talk it
myself
out of your ass
insane
and just
thinking
gotta-
about this shit.
yeah,
but
you
like,
just make yourself crazy. But getting just dialing it back from like that ridiculous shit, I do want to just talk about just the cast on a basic level.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we kind of dove into the structure of the show before we got into the cast. So we have Taylor Gray as Edward Bridger. I think he does a great job here. I think he's he's a young Jedi who obviously has a connection to the Force, looking for a master, finds Kanan Jarrus. Kanan Jarrus, voiced by Freddie Prinze Jr., who I love Freddie Prinze Jr. Like, I think he's a really good actor, and I think he brings a real authority to his voice.
He's had like more gravitas now as an actor than he ever did like in his prime for live action, especially because he's gotten older and his voice has just gotten more sultry. It's gotten like more gravelly, so he has a much more intimidating demeanor to his voice these days. I love him in this as Kanan Jarrus and also as Iron Bull in Dragon Age Inquisition.
Yes, and I mean, we grew up with him as Freddy, from Fred from the Scooby-Doo live action. So it's one of those things where I hear his voice and I hear Fred, but he's doing a different voice here, which shows how good he is at this,
And Sarah Michelle Gellar, who plays Daphne in those live action movies, is his wife, and she also voices the seventh sister.
Really?
Yeah, she's the female Inquisitor.
Nice. We also have Vanessa Marshall as Hera, who's a Twi'lek pilot, and is she technically a princess? I forget what's happening with her. She's like
can't remember if she's like royalty.
She's
or
the son. So she's the daughter of a side character in Clone Wars. There was this whole plot line where the Twi'leks take back their planet with a freedom leader, and basically Hera's the daughter of him, and she ran away from that whole thing of trying to take back their home world.
Because she was trying to join the rebel cause.
Yeah, and I love her character because she's kind of, the rest of the characters are classic like Star Wars characters, but she's like a very classic rebel, like when you think of the Rebel Alliance, you would think of her, like you would see that character.
And she's the clear like straight man / like den mother of the group.
Exactly.
And
then you have Steve Bloom as Zeb Orellis. I love Steve Bloom. What can you say? What can you say? He's fucking great. Like it's one of those things where every time you hear him talk, you're like, oh yeah, he's here. Nice. Like it's I mean,
Zeb's design is actually, we'll get to this as well with Chopper, is actually based on concept art for Chewbacca.
Yeah. Which is very interesting, like it's
There's a few stuff that's like lifted from like the original Macquarie artwork. That's also part of the reason why the lightsabers are so thin, but it doesn't really translate.
And the spiders are here. We talked about that in our Mandalorian episode. If you want to watch our Mandalorian season 2,
but Chopper as well is based on like old concept art for R2.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Almost and almost to the T. So I guess that's a good transition to Chopper. Chopper's their droid who helps them on their missions, and it's voiced by Dave Filoni, which is awesome. I love that. Like cameo in your own show, but like just make bip bopping noises.
Just come into the booth and just make stupid noises. Although
the reason why I love Chopper, and I know you are about to say you hate Chopper.
I don't hate Chopper.
No, you don't hate Chopper?
I'm indifferent to Chopper.
You're indifferent to Chopper. See, I love Chopper because you have sassy robots. You have C-3PO, sassy. You have R2-D2, sassy. You have the wonk droids, wonk, like, like there's
Donk.
wonk. It's like a lot of droids, they're either sassy or very plain, and I love this. Chopper is like malicious and mean and kind of a bully, and I kind of love that.
I just don't think they go far enough with it for it to like really hit with me. Like the
really,
few times,
because I feel like he could have been more of a dick. You know, like he could have pushed it further.
The only time I really like Chopper is when he goes like full psycho. Yeah. Like when he's rolling on one wheel with dual pistols shooting at stormtroopers like a madman. I'm like, more of this.
More of this. Yeah, exactly. That's why I like Chopper though, is I thought he was kind of this like unhinged robot, which you don't get to see in Star Wars, like is this like robot who's just
it's not always gibberish, because there are a few times when you can actually like hear Dave Filoni speaking a line.
Say a word.
It's just like muffled.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that too, like I like the old voice acting of like Abu, where you're not understanding what Abu's saying in Aladdin, but like you do, like you don't understand when he's like, but like he'll occasionally say like, and you'll be like, yeah, okay, I get what he's getting at, like, and I think Chopper's the same way, where he's like, he's sort of saying things, but not really. And I don't know why. I thought it was so funny. He was so mean. That's why I love Chopper. I was like, fuck yeah. And now to round out the crew, you have Sabine Wren. Now this is important because this brings the Mandalorian plot into, or the plot of Mandalore into this show. She's first off, at first, I didn't know how I felt about the character, because obviously it was like, look, it's cool to be artsy and badass. Like it was definitely like a Disney thing.
I was kind of into it from the start, or maybe that's just because that was like the exact type of girls I was attracted to, like in high school and stuff like that. Just like a Mandalorian street artist who dyes her hair. Shit.
Shit. I think that they do a great job of building her character up. They go from being like, is she cool, to being like, she holds the fate of Mandalore in her hands. Like what does she choose?
I just wish there were more like moments to challenge her, but this is sort of like a perpetual thing with Rebels in general, is that what really for me holds it back, like all encompassing, is that I don't feel like in places it goes far enough.
Really? Because I think that's what's fun about it, is that it's very ambiguous, because obviously these are original characters for the main cast, and they can kind of do whatever they want with it, and they float it in front of you constantly. I know this is skipping a bit, but Kanan loses his eyesight, like, which is like a big, like hit to who he was as a character. And you kind of, more importantly, you don't know if Ezra will go bad, like I feel like they do a good job of being like, does it, like Ezra could, like he could. Like,
sort
not
of,
really,
but they
totally,
really flirt with it for like the beginning of season 3, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then you occasionally bring it up again, but it's less about him turning to the dark side and more just Maul driving him to insanity.
Yeah.
So they flirt with the idea a bit, but it doesn't really go anywhere. I'm not expecting him to go like full dark side in the show anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where like it doesn't have enough meat on it for me.
I think for a comparison, this is a much better tempted by the dark plot than Rey gets. All you get with Rey is flashes of her looking evil, like in her visions. And that's like, she's tempted by the dark side, like, instead of Ezra, which is actually like pushed to this moment, these moments, like it's like actual character driven, instead of just like, Rey saw herself as evil, so she doesn't want to be evil, like
That's really just a Rise of Skywalker problem.
Yes, right. I mean, a little. Yeah, I mean,
well, Last Jedi is more of like the thing we seem to have been building up with Last Jedi was that we were sort of trying to eliminate the binary aspect of like Jedi and Sith, and that Rey was ultimately a good person, but she could envelop herself within the darkness but be completely unaffected by it. Yeah. That's what that scene where she goes into like that dark side pit is all about, and that's why like Luke is intimidated by her. But Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, Rise of Skywalker happens. So, and that's like the main cast on the ship for the first season. But then, of course, the second season is when, as I said, they realize that they're like, hey, we can be this can be the closing to our Clone Wars show that we never got, which they eventually will get. But it's one of those things that they didn't at the time, so they start to bring in Rex back. Rex is back from Clone Wars. He survived. He's out there living with the bros. And
Ahsoka had been introduced at the end, like the tail end of season 1, because you had like Fulcrum as their ally.
Yeah.
So then you got that big reveal at the end. And season 2 seem to at least want to hit the ground running, but it does like start off strong, but then start to like peter out a little bit until we start to meet the clones again.
Yeah, that's true, because you have the Siege of Lothal, which is fucking dope.
Because it's fucking Vader, because Vader shows up.
Yeah, it's fucking dope. And then you introduce, with the next 3 episodes, you introduce Rex and his commanders, you know, like that's, you're like, oh, sick. And then, yeah, they kind of like, they lose the way a little after that, you know, like they start off real strong and then it starts to go wrong right at Brothers of the Broken Horn, where it's Ezra and Chopper take the Phantom to investigate a distress call, where you're like, did I need a Ezra Chopper episode?
No.
No. And they try to like do these character episodes again, which they did in the first season, where they're like, oh, this is Sabine and Hera, and they're hanging out this episode. Oh, this is Zeb and Ezra this episode. You know, like that's how it feels, and that's what makes the show feel more kiddish than most. I feel like is that they feel like a Star Trek episode where they're like, oh yeah, this is a Picard and a Worf episode, you know, like, or the, you know, like where they're like, oh, this is where they're crossing over, you know, like instead of it being like, here's all the people together. I do, in this stretch of bad episodes though, you have Wings of the Master, where they introduce the B-Wing, and ooh, that's a good. That's a good. I love that shit. I love the B-Wing. I as a kid, I had this book which had all the Star Wars ships in it, and it's one of those things that like you had it as a kid, and it's just all that info stuck in your fucking brain, you know. It's just like, and of course I'm like, oh yes, an A-Wing, which, you know, you're like, oh, in the cockpit of the A-Wing is the like blah, 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 and you're like, what is that useful for? And then they're like, oh, but the B-Wing's here, and you're like, the B-Wing. It's like
the most I like learned about all the different ships was like Battlefront 1 and 2, because you had like the option to like pilot all of them when you were fighting in like the Galactic Conquest mode when you were in space. So you're like, okay, the B-Wing is, it's like, okay, you had the A-Wing because you had like, it had like bombs, you had the X-Wing because it basically had like turrets for rapid fire, so you got to like pick and choose.
Yeah.
And that's how I knew the difference.
That's how they do try to bring it back in the middle of the season. You can tell with the Future of the Force, they bring Ahsoka back and they deal with the Inquisitors again. And you're kind of like, you're like, okay. And that's kind of the problem with Clone Wars and Rebels, is they do this. It's a show that like, you don't know how good we have it with Mandalorian, with it being like, wow, what another great episode, you know, like instead of being like Rebels where you're like, another great episode, and then they're like, and now it's Ezra and Zeb, and they're gonna Stealth Strike, where it's the Ezra and Sato and Rex on a ship, and you're kind of like, it's good, but there's also Blood Sisters, which sucks. Which that? Oh yeah, that's the one where Sabine meets a bunch of other people. Is that what that is? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one where like Gina Torres' character gets introduced.
Yeah, just no. You know, like I know that sounds bad.
At least
but
the advantage of Rebels though is that at least when it has like a bad episode, it has the decency not to have it be a fucking 3-parter.
Yes, because so Rebels is like this, and it goes up and down and up and down. But then, if you had to do Clone Wars, it's like wee, and then a fucking, and it stays there for 3 episodes, and then wee, you know, like it's definitely like a fucking flat line when it comes to Clone Wars. When it goes bad for too long. You know, like you're like holy fuck, when does this end? But when it goes bad for Rebels, it's only like 1 episode. You know, like you have The Call where the weird episode where Ezra starts talking to the space whales, which first off, yes to the space whales, because I know that's original George Lucas stuff that he wanted to include, was these whales that literally just like floated through space and shit, and which I kind of dig, but also it's such a weird episode because Ezra's just like talking to the whales, you know, like it's just like, you're just like but then like literally they just like ramp into the end of the season after that, you know, like and you get a Yoda episode, which is fucking awesome. You know, like with Frank Oz reprising his role as Yoda.
He's got a weird model that didn't translate well. That's another thing to discuss, is especially for like Clone Wars characters, is like how well they translate to the very different art styles. Yes. And most make out okay. Like Obi-Wan looked pretty good, even though he looks a little young. Yoda looked weird because it just looked like his proportions were kind of off. Like he was too narrow. They should have like made him a little more squat.
Yeah, he looks like his Lego figure here. Is my problem with this model, is he looks like his Lego. Like he doesn't look like Yoda. He looks like somebody took his Lego and was
like,
just like
Bo-Katan looks fine. Anakin looked fucking weird. That was probably the worst one.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's just like, oh, that's not right. You're just like, okay.
You didn't even get that at all.
Yeah, it's one of those things where some of the designs work. I don't mind thin lightsabers. I think we haven't talked about this yet as much, but they have lightsabers that look more like the original concept art in Rebels.
But the problem is they don't translate well because the original Ralph McQuarrie concept art for the lightsabers weren't thin because they were like thin little tiny lasers and they make them look even more like glow sticks than they already do. Was because the McQuarrie artwork looked less like a laser sword and more like a beam of like fire.
Yeah.
It had like a beam of like more like hot energy rather than like a straight up like straight laser. That's why it worked for the concept art, and it doesn't really work with translated into Rebels.
I mean, because I kind of like it because it harkens to like the samurai traditions of what the Jedi are in general. You know, like is that they're using these like thin katana like weapons instead. You know.
True, but I feel like you already get that effect not only with the Darksaber, but also just given like something like Kanan's hilt, the way it's clearly designed to like emulate a katana hilt, but it still remains like sci-fi and doesn't feel too out of place. You can have that without the thin blades. And because Rebels is so beholden to like this more like kiddish art style, because it really is like a more kiddish art style, especially when compared to Clone Wars, you get stuff. Like, if this really wanted to be like the McQuarrie artwork and was more accurate to that, both in style and in execution, then the show would just look a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Like, it's emulating the concept.
I see what you're saying.
But it's putting it through a very specific filter.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it looks good at points, but yes, sometimes it just looks like paper tubes, you know, you know, like you're playing with paper tubes.
The animation in general did improve over time. One of the things that really bothers me for like all of season 1 and most of season 2 was the way characters over-expressed. Like everyone sort of had to talk with their heads rocking and their arms moving. Everyone spoke like they had Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Like
No
it was
offense,
really weird, and they like
yes.
dialed it back and made it a lot more natural, like from pretty much from like the end of season 2 on.
Yeah. Season 2 ends with some of the best. It's some of the best Star Wars. I know I said that with the Mandalorian episode, but this is the Rebels show in general might not be some of the best Star Wars, but Twilight of the Apprentice might be some of the best Star Wars ever made. This is dope ass episode.
Yep.
You want to go into
Yeah,
what happens in this episode?
So we end up at a Sith temple because we're discovering a an old like ancient super weapon that the Inquisitors and like Vader's like pretty much onto, and they want to try and grab it for themselves to make sure it's not used. The Inquisitors are on their tail. They all show up. Vader shows up at the end, and then out of nowhere we find that Maul's been on this planet the entire time. So we reintroduce Maul, and he's hanging around with Ezra, and you know that can't be good. And it pretty much all culminates not only with a big confrontation with the Inquisitors with some like dire consequences.
Yeah.
Because Maul's thrown in there as a wild card, but you also get like the payoff to the confrontation between Vader and Ahsoka in the first time she's confronted them since Anakin became Vader.
So I think it's important to point out that like I think we talked about this, is that like Maul is a pretty epic character, but didn't say anything in episode 1, and basically it's all just people being like, wow, Maul is cool, to be like how popular he is. It's the same as Boba Fett, where they were just like, wow, how cool. And Clone Wars and Rebels takes Darth Maul to being such a much higher level of villain. Like, just I feel like he goes from being like a side a side villain to being like the Joker of this universe, where you can't really figure out what he's going to do next, and it's kind of like he's not really a Sith anymore, so you don't really know whose side he's actually working for, and the only thing you can really rely on is he's trying to help himself. You know, like, and I mean, you already saw in Clone Wars him taking over all of Mandalore and all that, but of course he drums that shit up after this. But I really do. I think that Twilight of the Apprentice is some of the best Star Wars. It's got one of Darth Vader's best lines. When Ezra faces off against,
I don't fear you. You will die braver than most.
That is some of the best Darth Vader dialogue.
And I like the confrontation between him and Ahsoka. I love the part where she like takes part of his mask off, and you get to like see part of his face exposed, and then they bring back Matt Lanter.
It's emotional, like, you know, like, and what's crazy about it? It's emotional, not for just because of the original trilogy reasons. It's emotional on Clone Wars level, because it's Ahsoka and him, which you get none of anywhere else except for Clone Wars, and somehow it's one of those big emotional moments, because
Anakin is actually sort of like remotely sympathetic in Clone Wars, as opposed to the way he's portrayed in the movies, where you're just like, he's just a walking, talking red flag in the movies, so it's hard to feel bad for him. This is just sort of always coming, whereas you get
red flags. Come get your red flags.
Whereas you get more of a detailed like path of descent in Clone Wars. And it was cool that they brought Matt Lanter back to like voice those like little lines. Where he doesn't have the voice filter coming through. Now here comes my big query with Ahsoka that I had brought up in the Mandalorian episode, because this is something that comes up when I talk like Clone Wars and Rebels, and like Ahsoka now getting her own show, is the potential like overuse of her. Because here's the thing. I'm not at the point where I'm like tired of seeing Ahsoka, and I totally get it. Like, it's Dave Filoni's baby, definitely the most successful of like those like original characters. It makes sense that they want to utilize her.
Yeah.
But from a more satisfying like thematic story standpoint, I imagine most people assume that she was gonna eat it by the end of Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Might have been the plan at one point before it was canceled, and they decided to incorporate her in Rebels, so the plans had to change. But even as far as Twilight of the Apprentice, especially when you get later into the final season and you find that Ezra actually legitimately saved her from getting killed by Vader, begs the question of like, would it have been more complete and more thematic to actually like let her bite it?
No, I don't think so, because thematically, what is that? All it accomplishes is how what you already knew is that Darth Vader is heartless and that he would kill his former apprentice, that he is no longer Anakin, you know? And that's really the draw there, is that,
but like, let's say even if
Ahsoka still believes he's Anakin, you know?
But let's say even if Ahsoka didn't die at Vader's hands, like say, assuming Clone Wars got to end on its own terms on a very similar way it did, as opposed to the changes.
I'll stop you right there, because I think this is the why it works, is that Ahsoka now believes that she's lost Darth Vader, you know? And as far as Rebels and Mando is now concerned, she still doesn't know if Darth Vader's alive, dead, or or more importantly, if she's able to meet up with Luke at some point. That's the only time she would ever know that he actually went good at the end, you know, like that he actually wasn't Darth Vader at the end, that he did die as Anakin, you know, like, and I think that's obviously when the arc of Ahsoka can end well. Now, if you want her to live, is that she doesn't really know that her former master fought back, and that's the reason why she turns down Grogu, is that she still believes that there's no way once they become too involved with somebody, they can go bad, and they can never come back, is what she's thinking.
But even say theoretically, if Ahsoka wasn't in Rebels and we had more or less the same Clone Wars ending that we got, except it also ended with Ahsoka's death at the end of that, where it's not specifically by Vader's hands, but just the event of the Clone
Order
Wars
66.
Order 66, and the Clone Wars ends up taking her too.
Yeah.
Which the ending of Clone Wars is already pretty tragic and bittersweet, but I think about like, would that even propel it all the more further? But that's also me just thinking about it from like a writer's perspective of just like, hey, you got to kill your darlings.
Yeah.
It works for the story.
It's true. But that's why they killed, who's the guy with the tentacles that everyone always loved, that popped up in Clone Wars and everyone loved him.
Oh, Kit Fisto?
That. Yeah, Fisto. It's like they kill Fisto, you know? Like Fisto's really the baby there.
Well, that's like everyone. Like Plo Koon dies as well. It's one of those things where like if you watching Revenge of the Sith, you don't know who any of these fucking people are. They just show up occasionally. Watching it in a Clone Wars, after a Clone Wars context, you actually give a fuck. But it's just one of those things where, like, again, I'm not at that place where I'm like, oh, I feel like we've kind of milked Ahsoka enough and we could have, like, wrapped her up. I'm not at that point, but I can see that criticism.
So I can sort of see the criticism, but it's one of those things that she is their Harley Quinn, their Iron Man, you know, like, is that she brings the universes together, and that's why she's so much more useful.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like
she's the poster child for the new canon. That's why it doesn't bother me. And plus, if you want to talk about tragedy, I like at the point, especially by the time you get to Mando, that Ahsoka's been through some shit and there's still just more shit to go through.
More shit to go, right? Yeah, I agree. Where it's like, so I mean, that's the thing is with the Ahsoka show, what do you do? You know, like is of course you do like side quests with Ahsoka, of course. But what's the main thing. Is her because is it what I was saying, the emotional through point of maybe meeting Luke at some point and finding out that Anakin didn't die as Darth Vader, or like, like I don't know. I'm excited for the show either way, but it's one of those things that I think you could be right at some point, but I don't know if it's yet. Like it's like I don't think it's yet. I think Ahsoka is a great character. I love her. All the complaints people have about Rey, I think Ahsoka's the opposite. Like where they're like, oh, Rey's just a Mary Sue. You're like, well, you see Ahsoka learn all these things and grow to this great Jedi, and then she's not like an impossible Jedi. She's still.
I've heard the comparison before, even though I do have beef with the whole like the whole
no,
like.
I don't
Mary
like
Sue
that phrase. I don't like Mary Sue. I'm just using it because they use it when they they're trying to criticize this. I do not like that phrase, and I do not approve of that phrase, and I also don't think Rey is that.
Exactly. The phrase used to actually mean something before it became like annoying fans shorthand for female character too strong. I don't like it.
Yeah. You're like, oh, is it just okay that Luke can be a fucking like whatever.
You can go on and on.
It is the duality of it where they're like, that female character's too powerful, and you're like, how about that all the male characters in all of literature are just instantly powerful? Like you're like, come on.
But I think moving on from like the transition from season 2 to 3, so we do get like Kanan getting blinded, which is another reference to like original concepts and stuff, because the Obi-Wan equivalent back in the original drafts was supposed to be like a blind swordsman type. And it's not the first time they've tried to repurpose that, because you have the Master in Force Unleashed who also had that.
Yes.
But Force Unleashed ain't canon.
You're not anymore.
Fun fact, though, Filoni actually tried to canonize it. He actually considered making Starkiller one of the Inquisitors.
See,
to try and reincorporate it. And now that I've heard that, I really wish that happened.
Wish that fucking happened. Yeah, I would have taken like a 3-episode arc of that shit. Hell yeah. So season 3 is. So the thing about season 3 and 4 is that they are strong. They kind of have a purpose and they move. Season 3 goes, Thrawn is our main enemy, and we are going to work with that. And we've now done a time jump.
And they stick with it the entire time. Like, it's almost weird that season 3 and 4 are just like, we're done with Inquisitors, we're done with Vader, we're not really relying on like established characters from like the movies or stuff like that. Like, we got Thrawn and we got these established villains, and we're pretty much sticking with that till the end.
Seriously. And it's pretty great. I love Thrawn. I think he's one of the best Star Wars villains that they've created.
Well, they didn't create him.
Yeah, I mean, not Star Wars Rebel. I mean, in general, created. I didn't.
Shout out to.
I know he was created way before this.
Yeah, by Timothy Zahn. I do have thoughts about Thrawn, especially having recently like reread or listened to Heir to the Empire. And it's one of those things where like I've heard from people who were like super into the EU before and like had to adjust to the new canon now, that they were like disappointed in the way Thrawn was portrayed. I don't necessarily have that same feeling. I feel about it this way. It's sort of like a similar thing with like the art style that I mentioned earlier. I think the characterization is on point. Yeah, I love that he's still about like art and stuff. He's still cunning. I think Lars Mikkelsen is a great choice to voice him.
I think he's really good.
And to be honest, if they're going to push for him to make like his live action appearance, I still think Lars Mikkelsen can play him in live action.
Yep.
Like he can and should. But my thing is, the problem with Thrawn, even though he works for the context of this series, is that especially when you're comparing him to like his EU counterpart, is that he is being distilled by a specific type of filter because of the way the show is presented.
Yeah, because it's a kid's show.
I
mean, that would be the obvious thing, is that Thrawn is a cutthroat, merciless villain.
So I can get sort of the disappointment where like you were never going to get Thrawn on that level for the most part, going from the EU to
uncensored,
to
uncut
Rebels.
Thrawn.
Well, just the idea that like Thrawn, as far as the EU was concerned, was the big bad after the Emperor. Like the Thrawn trilogy is supposed to be basically the sequel trilogy that we had back when that was the only thing we had. And the problem with the way he's presented in Rebels, because it's in the context of like a children's show, is that his cunning is sort of undermined because he has that like Saturday morning villain problem where like he's supposed to be 2 steps ahead of everyone, but every time the rebels like counteract him by the simplest of methods is always just like, they have earned their victory. I will let them go this time, but next time I will rip them apart piece by piece. So it sort of like undermines them in that effect.
Yeah,
that's actually why I see the potential of him, like whether or not he like shows up in Mando or Ahsoka's own series, because the live action shows have more teeth than Rebels do. Not to undermine Rebels, like what Rebels can do. Like I think he has much more potential in that context than he did there.
Yeah. So maybe one of the best episodes in this entire show happens in the 3rd season too. Right at the end, you have twin sons. Just like Twilight of the Apprentice, this episode stands above even the show. You know, like when I'm talking about these best episodes, I almost am like, guys, if you don't want to watch Rebels, at least watch these. You know, because Twin Sons is the conclusion of Maul. It's the conclusion of where Obi-Wan's been. You know, like it's one of those just like epic moments that is just, it's so well done. You know?
We had brought up like simplicity and like confrontation that makes it feel more like a standoff as opposed to the more prequely like flippy dippy stuff. And I like how simple and subtle, but how many little touches there are in that confrontation with Maul. And I know there were like videos after the fact of like Sam Witwer explaining how that fight works. I didn't need that.
Yeah.
I had caught it while I was watching it. Because I'm just like, I caught all the little details with the stances. I'm like, okay, they're facing down each other. He's doing the fucking prequel thing with his fingers out. Now he's bringing it up to his head, Qui-Gon style. And I'm like, I immediately recognized that. I'm like, okay. And then Maul tries to feint him by hitting him in the head like he did for Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan sees right through it and cuts him down like nothing. It's like a samurai showdown.
I've had friends watch Rebels and say that's kind of anticlimactic, and I'm like, did we watch the same fucking scene, asshole? Like
you missed all the like subtle nuances for that. That was so subtle and so well done, and it doesn't like overly telegraph anything.
No,
it's all in the details.
It's a lot of show don't tell here, and that's why I say this episode just stands. And above
even beyond like those little details to pick up on, I like the implication that like the reason Obi-Wan wins so easily is because he's Ben Kenobi now. Like he's at that point where he's so wise and so forward that
he's been thinking about it. I think that's the other thing implied there is that he knew Maul was always going to come and find him, you know, like Kenobi, you know, like always going to come and get him.
It's a good way to like reconcile like how ridiculous the fighting is in the prequels versus how like funny it is in retrospect to watch like the Obi-Wan and Vader fight in A New Hope.
Yeah.
Because they reconcile the two by making it just like, no, it's just measured and simple because Ben Kenobi is like a total master now. He's like an old samurai.
And it's funny because I think that's not even the season finale of the season, and I think that is a better season finale than the season finale. The season finale is good. It's 0 Hour, part 1 and part 2. Solid. It's Thrawn actually tricking the gang. You actually get to see Thrawn be kind of him, you know, like actually be what we were promised, you know.
And you also get Bendu losing his mind, who we haven't even brought up yet. Bendu is an interesting addition.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I brought this up in our Clone Wars episode. I like aspects of Star Wars that make the Force seem larger than just the simple stuff. I like when it gets more abstract and out there.
And it's Tom Baker. Like, you know, like I know it's weird, you know, like I know it's a weird thing going on there, but it's Tom Baker.
I like the chaos, like in between. It's just like I'm on neither side. I am the Bendu. I am beyond the two sides, and I love stuff like that. Like I had mentioned in Clone Wars, like one of my favorite episodes is that 3-parter with the son, the father, and the daughter on Mortis, because I like when the Force is portrayed as like this more ethereal thing that's more than just telekinesis and lightning all the time.
And it's one of those things for me as somebody, as writers, it's like this is a hard subject to talk about. You're about to try to characterize the Force, and if you fuck this up, like they did in episode 1, where they're like, it's metachlorians, like you can like people will like completely throw it out if they don't like it, and they do such a good job with not only the Bendu, but like the father-son episode, son and daughter episode, because that could have gone wrong in so many ways. I feel like that episode toes the line so well of being like, we're going to expand this and it could go wrong, but they nail it. And
yeah, the same goes with like the Yoda episode where he's like traveling through the netherworld of the Force and like having all these visions and stuff like that. I like stuff that makes the Force seem a lot more open and out there. Last Jedi had a sprinkle of that too, but then we dialed it back. But then we backpedaled.
I really do think that they knew what they were. The great thing about, sorry, I'm getting a little bit distracted, but Rebels, the great thing about it is that they kind of knew with this last season that they were going to end it, Clone Wars, they finally do get their ending and they get to like plan out their ending and they do it. But it's like at that point, we still hadn't had it. And it's nice for Rebels to finish nice, like to actually like complete its story, like try to do everything it wanted to. And it pretty much nails it. Most of the final season is pretty damn solid, I would say. Overall, it's all like 8s up, in my opinion, like all solid stuff.
Yeah, it definitely takes itself a little more seriously. We actually finally get like a major character death in the cast.
Yes.
Even though as much as I do like the way Kanan's death is handled in the final season, I just wish it wasn't telegraphed so hard because I saw it coming a mile away.
Yeah. Exactly. And you're like, ooh, yeah, he ain't gonna make it.
Just death flag.
It's one of those things though that they kill him, and the Doom thing, the wolf Doom could have been so cheesy, like it's one of those moments where you're like, is this working? And then by the end of the episode, you're like, this worked, like it's weird because it's not a Force ghost per se. It's kind of like a reincarnation, sort of.
But it's
which
just
is weird for Star Wars.
But that adds to like the mystique of the Force, where it's not necessarily one thing, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more like where the Jedis want to put their energy, like is kind of it. They're in the Force, and then when they want to manifest, they can manifest in different ways, and I think this the last season works because it was a time skip. So now we're after Empire Strikes Back, and we're like sort of in Return of the Jedi time, sort of, right?
No, I don't think so. I think we're still like creeping up.
Am I thinking of the ending when they're past every
yeah, because there is like the final like epilogue at the end of the episode where it's definitely like post Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just jumping ahead. I'm just jumping around here. But overall, season 4 is extremely strong. Thrawn is able to be used a bunch. We have an actual good Saw Gerrera episode with In the Name of the Rebellion, which, I mean, Saw Gerrera with Forrest Whitaker pretty cool. But
Yeah,
also,
and Saw's inclusion in the final season basically tells you where that takes place. Because if it's before even Rogue One, because he dies in that, then we haven't even gotten to A New Hope yet.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry, I was just jumping around to the end of it, but I think that's what's great about this is that it's cool when you can lead. Star Wars at the time was trying to lead things into each other, you know, like they were like, oh, Rogue One leads directly into episode 4, you know, like, and episode 3 picks up right after 2, you know, like it's one of those things where they were trying to connect them all. And what's great about In the Name of the Rebellion and a bunch of the other episodes in this season is that they feel like a lead up to Rogue One. And almost feel like they connect, you know, like it come very, very close. Run right into each other.
It also does a good job of reconciling the two versions of Saw Gerrera, because Saw in like Clone Wars versus the way he's portrayed in Rogue One is almost feels like a completely different person, but because of his appearances in Rebels, they're able to sort of like reconcile the two to make it feel a little more natural, especially since he has like the picture of like his sister who died in Clone Wars and stuff like that. And you also see his like slow degradation because he's already unstable at the start, but then he slowly goes crazy. Because if you really think about it, that's probably the first of the like Clone Wars characters they like canonized in live action. Even though he was much more of a minor character.
They were like, we're gonna bring him in, and they brought him in as Rogue One. And
still a first step.
I think Forrest Whitaker's a great. I think he's a great actor. So I think that he played a great Saw Gerrera. He's fucking awesome. And I do think that this show ends well. And it really it's funny because it's one of those things that the show starts off so rough and ends pretty polished, you know, like
I think they found a clever way to sort of kill Ezra off, but not really kill him off.
Yeah.
Because at some point, like I know you had said they can pretty much do whatever they want with these characters. Well, yes and no, because we got to clean the slate to make way for the original trilogy, because we can't have all these Jedi running around because it just makes it weirder. So the idea of just like killing Kanan off, especially so soon before the finale, which apparently Freddie Prinze Jr. had to like really make Filoni stick to his guns, because Filoni was just like, but we love Kanan, this is kind of depressing. He's just like, no, this was the plan from the start, and you're gonna kill him with it.
You kill him.
Which again also kind of comes into like the Ahsoka conversation that we had before. It's just one of those things where like, you know, sometimes it's more thematic if you kill your loved ones. There are no favorite children when it comes to creative storytelling. You kill all your darlings.
Except Kanan is not as marketable as Ahsoka. And I think that's the other thing here is that Disney's like, I can make Ahsoka toys, right? And they're yes. Yeah. And they're like, okay, she stays forever.
I did find it clever that like we just kind of banish Ezra to what I assume is just like the unknown regions, and which is weird because I've always had a thing for it. I wouldn't even call it a trope. I don't see it that often, but I've always liked the trope of like exile or banishing or sending someone to like this an unknown region or planet or dimension where they can't come back. Because usually when they do finally come back, they're like this war-hardened badass who's had to survive on their own.
Yeah, and so you're saying you like the Jon Snow ending of Game of Thrones? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's sort of a different thing. because he has like all the wildlings like at his back.
Yeah, I think you're more referring to like Captain America on Planet Z, where they're just like somehow he's on Planet Z, and you're like, fuck,
stuff like that. Or I think like shout out to people who even remember this show, like fucking Bob being sent into the web and Reboot.
Oh shit, Reboot.
Yeah, that's a real.
That's a throwback. That's a
tiny little audience right there. But stuff like that. It'd be more like if Jon Snow was sent to like Valyria and had to like survive on his own with all like the stone people and stuff like that. More something like that.
Fair enough. And so maybe more Grey Worms thing, but whatever. It doesn't matter because Game of Thrones don't matter. But Star Wars always matters. So really though, I mean, how do you want to sum it up? Like, what are your end feelings on Rebels?
I would say that it doesn't, to me, it doesn't reach the highest highs that Clone Wars does, but also because it doesn't focus as much on multi-parters, it doesn't also reach the lowest lows that Clone Wars does either. So that kind of puts it somewhere in the middle. So I find Rebels overall solid.
Yeah.
I just think a lot of it is held back because it's trying to aim for a younger audience than you could argue Clone Wars was.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I feel like Disney has gotten it right now that they have the separate show. They have Star Wars Resistance, which is very much a kid's show, you know, without like Dave Filoni being in there being like, but what if we did introduce plot? You
and
know,
it's
like
one of those things where I feel like if I wasn't watching it with my buddy Rob the entire time, I think it would have been much harder to get through those like underwhelming episodes. But because we were just going through it together,
yeah, you
it
were
was
having a good
easier to
time.
like, yeah, it was easier to get through overall. But
Yeah.
thankfully, we're sort of in a better place now anyway, like post Clone Wars final season. I'm sure the Bad Batch won't have a problem with like being held back, especially since it's like at Disney Plus from the ground up.
It's true. I mean, so it's funny because it's like the Bad Batch is such a weird spinoff. I feel like it's like Rebels makes sense almost, you know, where they're like, hey, we're trying to do something different. It's like Bad Batch is fighting such an uphill battle because it has none of the advantages of all the new shows. Other than it might have some Jedi in it because it's still Clone Wars, you know.
But I guess it's been stewing for a while. Like the Bad Batch episode was written back in the day when they had like that initial outline for the final season before the show got canceled. Also, fun fact, I had only just found out about this like not too long ago because I had wondered what happened to Ventress post Clone Wars.
Yeah,
because she just kind of disappears in Clone Wars, and I haven't seen her in anything like original trilogy era.
After the train episode,
I know
she just kind of disappears, right?
Yeah, I know in pre-Disney canon, she survived the end of the Clone Wars and like just went off to the unknown regions. But I wanted to find out what happened to her in like Disney canon.
Yeah.
And I found out was that there were actually 4 episodes written out back when they were going to do the original version of the final season that was actually going to conclude her story.
Really?
But after the show got canceled and they figured that they weren't going to ever get to it, they actually took what was written for those 4 episodes and they turned it into a novel.
Really?
A canon novel.
Right,
so,
the Ventress novels, yeah.
Yeah, which concludes her story. And because the novel is considered canon, they didn't bother like trying to adapt it when Clone Wars did come back.
Huh, interesting. I didn't know that. I might have to listen to that one. Because I like Ventress. I'd like to see the end of that. For me, I dig Rebels. I'm not going to go like when I'm recommending shows to people. Like when we're talking about Disney Plus, I'm like, absolutely watch Clone Wars. It saves the prequels, makes them 10 times better. Absolutely watch them. And then afterwards, watch Rebels because then you'll understand all the Mando references, you know, like that's, I mean, there's not many Mando references to it other than Ahsoka, but like, and Thrawn, but like, it's more Clone Wars references the whole time, you know, like it's more like Bo-Katan, you know, like, and, I mean, Bo-Katan's in Rebels too. I'm not, and I think there's some really strong things here. Like the Mandalorian episodes here are so good with Sabine and Bo-Katan running around. And
I still wish they went a little further.
Exactly.
Like
I think you're exactly on the money there. Is that like sometimes it gets it right, and other times it needs to go like 2 steps.
Yeah,
further.
Rob and I called like total cop out when they made you believe that Sabine's like mother and brother had died.
Yeah.
And then they were immediately fine. Like a minute later, we were immediately just like, cop out. Come on, Rebels, show some teeth.
Teeth. I know. It was
Because
one of those things where I was just like, oh, I forgot I was watching Disney XD. Like, fuck.
As much as I like Sabine, I feel like there was more room for like character development for her. And that would have been a great conflict for her losing family like that. That could have propelled her, similar to like the small character arc we had with Ezra potentially going to the dark side.
Yeah. And basically Ezra confirming his loss of his parents, because that's a whole thing, is they keep and it's kind of interesting, you know, like it's kind of a Rey storyline where Rey's looking for her parents, you know, like, and then she learns that they're gone, you know, like, or not around at all, you know, like, and it's just that you don't have J.J. Abrams being like, oh, Ezra's actually a Palpatine, you know, you know, like, he's just like, wait, hold on a second. You mean everybody has to be related to these two families to have the Force? And they're like, no, just all our main characters.
Yeah, of course, your main character can't be strong because they're competent or because they lived on their own and had to raise themselves. And, you know, School of Hard Knocks. Now they have to be related to someone to be special.
Exactly. It's one of those things that's why, again, I like Ahsoka, you know, like, is that she's pretty much self-made.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like it worked for the original trilogy because we were like pulling from like Arthurian tales and stuff like that. Like, but we're in 2020 now. We don't need to turn everything into a eugenics class.
Yeah. You're just like
it's more than just about like the throne was given to lesser men.
It's true. So basically, guys, I will say, go watch Rebels. Like, if hopefully you're not getting like maybe I shouldn't watch Rebels thing. This is good stuff. I do recommend it. When I'm recommending shows, I do recommend Clone Wars a lot more, even though there is more shit to go through when we're talking about Clone Wars. Because like, I would say that the real shit of Rebels is just at the beginning. After that, it stays decently solid. You know, like, there is bad moments, but again, Deshaun's right. It's only like one episode instead of 3 episodes, you know? Like,
yeah, and to be honest, I've said this before, but I'm not ever going to blame anyone if the first season really doesn't sell you and you want to drop off, because as much as it is true that it does pick up, I do also have the attitude of just like, well, why do I want to watch an entire season where it's not really hooking me just to get to the good stuff? Even though it is a lot more common. My
argument to that is that there's not many good sci-fi first seasons. It's hard to just really stick your footing on a sci-fi show in the first season. And I mean, that's true for a lot of shows. The first seasons can be rough. And I feel like sci-fi shows in general have this reputation of a terrible first season, and then they finally figure out what they want to do. But
that's not going to be everyone's problem.
No, definitely not. But guys, thank you for listening to our Rebels episode. Thank you for talking Star Wars with us again. We love talking Star Wars.
Yep.
So please, if you want to hear more Star Wars stuff, we have a Mandalorian episode. We have season 2. We have season 1 and Rise of Skywalker together. We have a bunch of Star Wars episodes. We love talking Star Wars. So please check those out. But again, we're going to try to stop talking Star Wars for a bit here.
At least until the next show comes out. Or if
exactly.
And then like the Rogue Squadron, whatever comes
have
first.
Something new to talk to you about.
Yeah.
But overall, thank you guys. Check out Rebels. Please check out all our other Star Wars episodes. We're on every podcast platform you could possibly think of. We are also on galaxygeek.com. All our episodes are on there. That's where we do articles and reviews, and every episode of our show's on there. So that's probably the easiest place to get it there. But we also are Yupfrank and Mod Karaika on Instagram and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a Facebook page if you're into that. But if you really want to get into the nitty gritty and talk to us about stuff, it's probably Twitter or our Discord. We have a Warp Shelf Discord that we have posted on our Facebook page, and we try to attach it on the bottom of episodes. So you can come and actually like we'll get into it, you know, like let's talk about this shit. But thank you guys for tuning in. We do the show for you guys, so thank you so much. And I hope you continue to support, and I hope you have a great week.
See you next time.